Today, we're diving into the story of one of history's most larger-than-life figures, Louis XIV of France. His reign, a staggering 72 years, is the longest of any major monarch in European history. And let me tell you, he didn't just rule an era, he was the era, an absolute monarch who famously called himself the Sun King. But here's the thing, Louis wasn't born this all-powerful, confident ruler. His story is actually this incredible transformation, from a genuinely terrified kid to the most dominant king in all of Europe. So the question that's going to drive our whole story is pretty simple. How on earth did that happen? Let's get into it. You know, to really understand Louis, you have to start with his childhood, because pretty much everything he did as king was a direct reaction to the absolute chaos he grew up in. This period was called the Fronde, a series of nasty civil wars where the French nobility tried to tear down the power of the crown. And this wasn't some far-off political drama for him. This was deeply, deeply personal. I mean, just imagine this. You're 12 years old and an angry mob smashes its way into your bedroom. They surround your bed, they're staring you down, and you have to lie there completely still, pretending to be asleep. That kind of terror, that profound humiliation, well, that's a lesson Louis would never, ever forget. And look, this wasn't just a one-time thing. For 5 years, basically from age 10 to 15, his life was pure instability. He and his family had to flee a rioting Paris on more than one occasion. It was during these years that he developed this lifelong hatred of Paris and, more importantly, a deep, simmering distrust of his own powerful nobles. This experience became the blueprint for his entire reign. Okay, let's fast forward. It's 1661, Louis is now 22 years old, and his chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin, dies. Everyone, and I mean everyone, expects him to just appoint a replacement. But nope, he gathers the court and stuns them all by announcing that from now on, he would rule completely alone. This was it. This was the moment his grand project to build a totally new kind of French monarchy truly began. So, what was the big idea powering all this? It's a concept called absolute monarchy, and specifically, the divine right of kings. Louis truly believed that his authority didn't come from the people or from tradition, but straight from God. What does that mean? It means challenging the king was the same as challenging God himself. That idea became the rock-solid foundation for everything he did. And this wasn't just some abstract theory. He had a plan, a methodical 4-step playbook. Step 1, declare personal rule. Done. Step 2, and this was his genius move, neutralize the nobility. Not by fighting them, but by seducing them. He forced them all to come live at his new palace, Versailles, and basically turned these powerful, dangerous rivals into courtiers obsessed with petty drama, like who got to hand him his shirt in the morning. Step 3, centralize all power in the state with bureaucrats loyal only to him. And finally, Step 4, completely overhaul the army and the nation's finances. And the result of all this ruthless consolidation of power, well, it kicked off an era of French cultural and military dominance that Europe had never seen before. Historians call it the Grand Siècle, the Great Century, and Louis was right at the center of it all, shining like the sun. Of course, the ultimate symbol of this whole era was the Palace of Versailles. This place wasn't just a building, it was a magnificent theater for his power. And by making the entire aristocratic live there, Louis turned the palace into what's been called a gilded cage. It was a brilliant, beautiful prison designed to distract, entertain, and ultimately domesticate his most powerful political rivals. But Louis knew that true power wasn't just about armies and politics. It was about culture. He saw soft power as a weapon, and he wielded it like a master. He poured state money into supporting geniuses like the playwright Molière and the composer Lully. Versailles became the cultural heartbeat of the world. Pretty soon, every other court in Europe was speaking French, copying French fashion, and dancing French dances. He was literally exporting his own glory. But, and this is a big but, all of this glory came at a truly staggering price. Louis's ambition, it turns out, had no off switch, and it would lead France down a dark path of endless war and brutal persecution. You know, to really get his foreign policy, you just have to look at his personal motivations. For Louis, war wasn't just politics. It was the ultimate stage for him to show off. His decisions were often driven by what one historian called a mix of commerce, revenge, and pique. Basically, a dangerous cocktail of strategy and pure ego. And the result was a reign that was defined by almost non-stop warfare. Just look at this list of major conflicts. Yeah, each one might have expanded France's borders a little bit, but all together, they did something else. They united the rest of Europe against France and bled the French treasury completely, utterly dry.
200,000. Let that number just sink in for a minute. What is it? That's the estimated number of Huguenots. These were highly skilled Protestant craftsmen, merchants, and intellectuals who were forced to flee France.
They fled because in 1685, Louis made a disastrous decision. He was obsessed with the idea of one king, one law, one faith. So he revoked something called the Edict of Nantes, which for almost a century had given Protestants in France religious freedom. This single act of religious intolerance was an economic own goal of epic proportions. It created a massive brain drain that weakened the French economy for generations and created bitter enemies all across Protestant Europe.
So as Louis grew old and the sun began to set on his long reign, the real nature of his legacy started to come into focus. And it was, and still is, incredibly complicated.
His legacy is really just a study in contradictions. For every brilliant achievement, there was an equally devastating price tag. On the one hand, he created a modern centralized state. On the other, he left it totally bankrupt. He expanded and secured France's borders, but he left the nation completely exhausted by decades of war. He gave France unmatched cultural glory, but he locked in a system of social inequality that was just unsustainable. You know, maybe the most honest verdict on his reign comes from the Sun King himself. On his deathbed, he gave this shockingly candid warning to his 5-year-old great-grandson, who was about to become the next king. He admitted that his love for war was often just about vanity. It's a rare, stunning moment of self-awareness from a man who spent his entire life crafting an image of godlike perfection.
And that right there is the final crucial takeaway. Louis XIV perfected absolute monarchy. He built the system to its zenith. But in doing so, he created a system that was powerful, yes, but also incredibly brittle. He left behind a kingdom drowning in debt, seething with inequality. And in doing so, he sowed the very seeds of the French Revolution that would, less than a century later, consume his family and destroy the very world he had built. Which leaves us with one last nagging question. He made France the center of the universe. He gave it an age of glory that still defines it today. But was all that glory worth the catastrophic price that France and the monarchy would one day be forced to pay?